This is Open Door with Vince Robinson. In-depth conversations with people who are making a difference in the lives of others here and around the world. Culture is at the heart of who you are. Know your culture, find yourself on Open Door with Vince Robinson.
Grand dawning, great rising, Cleveland, Ohio, and the rest of planet Earth. Welcome to another edition of Open Door with Vince Robinson. My guest this morning is the faculty director of the program in writing and rhetoric and an affiliate faculty member of the programs in African and African American Studies in Science, Technology, and Society at Stanford University. Prior to arriving at Stanford, he served on the faculty of the Department of Writing, Rhetoric, and Digital Studies at the University of Kentucky and the Syracuse University Writing Program. In addition to these academic appointments, he served as the Langston Hughes Visiting Professor of English at the University of Kansas and jointly with the Andrea Lunsford as the inaugural Rocky Gooch Visiting Professors for the Bread Loaf School of English. That sounds quite impressive, but I also want to mention that this brother was part of a duo that used to come to Robin's Nest back in the year 2000. He was the kind of non-vocal person, and his partner, Thomas Sayers Ellis, was very vocal and used to heckle us while we were on stage at Robin's Nest.
Oh, no.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have to introduce you to Dr. Adam Banks. Welcome to the program this morning, brother.
My man, thank you, brother. Really good to be able to talk to you. And the flashback to TSE is a great one, man. That you put me in the time machine there.
Yes, it was a time machine, and it was really when my stint as a poet and organizer of events really kind of started. You were right there at the ground floor level, and I've just been amazed to see your trajectory. You know, you've gone from being that guy with TSE to being Dr. Adams Banks. So it's been quite a journey, and I want to take folks along on that journey. So we'll start, as we do with a lot of folks who are on this program, talking about Cleveland roots. I take it you are Cleveland born and bred?
Yeah, yes, indeed. Went to John Hay, went to Cleveland State after that. Yeah.
Okay. And at a certain point, you, I guess, decided to take English very seriously and education very seriously. When did that paradigm shift take place for you?
It happened pretty early, actually. I was at Cleveland State as an undergrad. I thought I was going to be an engineer because I was always better at math and science than other subject areas. And I got to CSU, joined a couple of the student orgs, did engineering student orgs, did a couple of shadowing experiences, and immediately hit eject. I just decided that would be the most boring life ever. And I flipped and went to the other side of the intellectual world and majored in English and stayed with it all the way through, undergrad and grad.
Wow. It's really interesting because that's a dichotomy. You're talking about the sciences and the real technical things, and then you shift gears and you get into literary pursuits and language and linguistics, which they're kind of related when you understand the power of sound and words and all of that. But to approach your life from a literary perspective and not a scientific perspective is really kind of I don't want to call it a stretch, but it really is a contrast.
It certainly is. It's now I had what might be either an interesting or a funny moment later. One thing I tell grad students when I work with them is that as you push through in your work, there becomes this moment where the harmonies of what you think about and what you care about come together. And that moment for me happened. I was taking some classes at Case, some grad classes there. And this was the moment where the digital divide really became a big conversation topic academically, in terms of policy, in terms of people organizing and activism, and in terms of this question of Black folks and access to technology, where it can be a liberating force or it can be something, a tool for liberation, but it also always ends up being a tool of magnifying oppression. That issue came together, that issue brought together some of the things I think about and I'm interested in on the tech side of the world and the language side of things that I had always cared about.
You know, I'm thinking as you're expressing this about the fact that you weave the Black experience and you also deal with Afrofuturism. So you bring all these elements together, and even though it may not be technical per se, it really is because of the relationship between science and life. You have a series that you have been involved in. You're kind of bringing education to the masses, so to speak, those who can't afford that hefty price to go to Stanford. You're bringing it to the community. So I want to focus a little bit on what you're doing within that realm. Can you talk about your approach to bringing intellectualism to the folks, the everyday folks?
Yeah, it's been a joy to do it. So the most recent session, as you mentioned, I titled it "Anansi and the Machine" because I wanted to get into where Black oral traditions, Black language traditions, from the folk tales all the way up to the present, really ends up being a kind of a core element of what drives digital culture, what drives our online lives. And so first and foremost, I just want to get us more grounded in Black oral traditions, period, but then use that to connect to the richness of Black life in the online space.
You know, when you talk about that oral tradition, it occurs to me in this moment, one of the reasons that it's so important as we see what's going on in our country today and perhaps in other parts of the world, there's this deliberate effort to erase history. And
That's right.
And they say if you want to hide anything from us, you put it in a book. But when you are handing things down through an oral means, the book is not quite as important in terms of the narrative, in terms of preserving history, in terms of actually facing the future. So if you could you just talk a little bit more about the importance of the oral tradition?
Yeah, to your point about seeming contrasts between the oral and the literary, that oral tradition really becomes a talking book. That's one way that I described it. And I described it that way for a couple of reasons. We've got the Incandescent album from Stevie in 1972 by that title, of course. But then the idea of the talking book is what they call a trope for literacy for freedom. So there are all of these moments in narratives by enslaved Africans who got themselves free, where they link their ability to read, learning to read, to their physical, mental, and spiritual freedom. And there's a lot to get into with that trope or with that idea. But the key is, for me, the oral tradition can be, even in this moment in 2025, it can be the bridge to both print and digital literacy in ways where we're able to engage the print of the book. You talk about hiding it in a book, and the digital on our own terms.
You know, what's interesting about that is this book that is such a huge influence on our lives, and that is the Bible. And in this moment, I'm just thinking about how much truth is hidden in plain view. The fact that we can read the book and not necessarily understand what we're reading. The fact that we have to have people to interpret the words that are in that book. But just the whole idea of how intellect is one of the driving forces in oppression and freedom. So I'm just thinking about how when you free your mind through whatever means, it's one of the ways that we can combat these efforts to take us away from our history, from our understanding of ourselves, and from what it will take to liberate us from the oppression of thought. It's interesting to me how there are just such I can't even put it into words, but it's just this huge effort to control everything that we think about. And we have to be able to push back in some way.
No, you're absolutely right. And in this moment, it's becoming even more draconian and more obvious. The attempt to be slick, that's to be slick about the mechanisms of oppression. That's all gone by the wayside in this moment. But to your point about the mental, the intellectual, the willingness to read and engage as being key to liberation. So, on the pop culture side, we have Marley, right? We have Emancipate Yourself from Mental Slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. We have Parliament Funkadelic, Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow, or Your Behind Will Follow. But I'm going to take those two references because of how much that idea is in so much of our tradition, from the music to, you mentioned, the Bible, to the sermons, to the activism. But then, since you mentioned Afrofuturism, the Afrofuturism course was rooted in a look at Star Trek Deep Space Nine, primarily because of what Avery Brooks managed to do in playing the role of Captain Sisko. But there's one of the episodes, just give me 1 second here, it's called The Storyteller. And it really is a take on the idea of the griot. And what happens in this Storyteller episode, one of the characters, so they get trapped on a planet, and the person who used to be the one to provide the people with the story that unifies them and helps to marshal their collective power falls ill and dies. And then the character from Star Trek has to take his place. And what's wild about the episode is, in some ways, the story, the individual story, the collective story of a people is not that difficult. And one would even think, why do we need somebody to tell us this? So you mentioned the biblical story, and why we need someone to interpret. There's interpreting that word, but then there's also being able to bring it to people in a way that helps them tap into their individual power and helps marshal the collective power of a people to resist oppression and to gain their own liberation. And so thinking about the storyteller in our conversation, the griot, in that way, it's about being the bearer of the culture like you've always been for us, Vince. And it's also about how we can use that to help people see each other and tap into each other's collective power.
Yes. I have to agree wholeheartedly with you. It really is about tapping into the power that you have within yourself. And I think one of the things that has happened is that the words have been used to separate us from our power. And when we can when we can discover, what we have within ourselves and who we really are, I think that's when the real paradigm shift takes place. We're going to talk about yes. We're going to talk about the program that you have coming up on July 26th on the other side of this spot, right here on 95.9 FM WOVU, Cleveland's Urban Alternative. I'm speaking with Dr. Adam Banks. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson and my conversation with Dr. Adam Banks, who is going to initiate a program at UnBar on Saturday, July 26th. Tell us about that program.
An initiative that the short version, the short way to describe it is it's a community space for conversation, for intellectual work, for dialogue that is for us, primarily for our folks. And it's in the Larchmere neighborhood, so it's at a place that is easy to access. So the core of the idea is, from quarter to quarter, I change the topic, and the topics usually have something to do with language, culture, technology. History is woven through that, of course. And so we mentioned the Afrofuturism course before. Nancy and the Machine is one of those courses. And so we have different ones all the time. Last summer, we read Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower together because of the wild times that we're in. So the one starting on July 26th, and we're going for 4 consecutive Saturdays, is focused on Winston Willis's memoir that his sister, Aundra Willis Carrasco, worked really assiduously, really hard to put together, that looks at his experience growing up, his coming to Cleveland, the way that he was able to purchase all kinds of property in Cleveland as a prominent business person, and the ways he had to fight as hard as he could against so many different people and factors to try to hold on to his property when, in the expansion of the Cleveland Clinic, University Circle, those two entities and the city of Cleveland were really dedicated to getting him out of his property because they saw the property as an eyesore. They saw him as a nuisance because he was combative and didn't take any mess from anybody. And by the way, was really beloved among Black folks, at that time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've had conversations with people who knew him and perhaps worked at some of the places that he owned. And, when you talk about that, there's a certain level of reverence. But when you hear the story, it's tragic in a real sense. And the evidence of the aftermath is those new shiny buildings on Euclid Avenue, between East 105th Street and East 55th Street. And it's just so obvious in terms of what's going on right now. One thing I want to mention, and this is just an idea that resonates with me just because of what I know about your work. I reflect on J. Edgar Hoover and his demonization of Black intellectualism. And we have this idea of something called white supremacy, which I push back on because I don't think that white supremacy exists, in fact, at all. I characterize it as pseudo white supremacy. But what I take away from what Hoover was all about, the greatest threat to this pseudo white supremacy is Black intellectual thought. So, when I think about work being done and I look at the work that you're doing, it's like this is something that just pushes back on that whole idea, of white supremacy. So I want to put that out there before it escapes my mind. You've talked about a few different opportunities that you've had for engagement with the public. You looked at Deep Space Nine. You looked at Octavia Butler's book. Recently, you looked at the film Sinners, and I shared with you the other day why I can't see that film. But for those who were involved in it, could you talk about the significance of that film and what you took away from it?
Absolutely. I'm really appreciative of the question. So, there are a lot of reasons why there are some people who are not willing to, connect with that film. And there are many good reasons for that, where people are in terms of what the movie does for me. So for a long, long time, and I'm talking about Black folks in this we've had this challenging relationship between the sacred and the secular, because at least in the Christian faith tradition, the sacred and the secular are presented as being utterly opposed. And this is especially the case when it comes to different forms of Black music. Jazz was a crucial one. Blues was a crucial one. They were seen as the devil's music, right? And so despite the fact that there's that tension, they have always belonged together as two sides of the same coin. In African ways of seeing the world, there is not that easy division between sacred and secular. They exist together in relationship to each other. So Sinners does several things remarkably well. I'll point to three of them. So from the title of the movie, Sinners, right, and the conflict that is presented between the main character, Sammy, preacher boy, and his dad, who is a preacher. It's all about his dad not wanting Sammy to play the blues. It's all about, those houses of iniquity, juke joints, nightclubs, stuff like that being a problem. And the primary thing the movie does beautifully there, because when you have the title Sinners, the question is, where is the sin? Who are the sinners? The movie takes up the blues and lets us know emphatically that is not where sin is, even in the Christian sense. The sin is in those forces that would co-opt Black culture, that would want to usurp everything possible from Black communities, oftentimes even with a welcoming gesture. So that's one thing it does incredibly well. Another thing it does incredibly well is it links different genres and moments and times in Black music and culture. The iconic scene in the juke joint brings together the blues with the field hollers, the work songs, the spirituals, the gospel, the hip hop. It brings it together with forms of music from across the water on the continent. It puts music and dance together. It puts past, present, and future together. And so since we were talking about the griot earlier, it really is griotic in holding together all of those elements. And then it also, the third thing that I gestured toward earlier in talking about the blues, in this exploration of where sin actually lies, it opens up space for liberation work by Black folk who are fully aware of where the forces that would steal from us, that would extract from us, and then oppress us, where those forces actually are.
Mm. As you express this, I'm just wondering, obviously you have an aptitude that allows you to take this in and to critically and analytically look at that film and derive all that you have. Do you think that those who go to that film to be entertained, do you think that they pull at the same level or the other?
So I think a couple of things about that question, brother. One, the collective is always greater than the individual, right? And so in the collective conversation, there has been such depth. There's been such desire to really get into the nuances of this thing and everything that Ryan Coogler, the actors, Coogler's team put together. So when I saw the depth and the intensity of the conversation among folks, some were street, some were academic, some were church, some were all over the place. And so that collective conversation has been so powerful. And so the second point is connected to the first. I really believe that the wisdom, the beauty, the power in everyday Black folk has its own set of aptitudes. And sometimes those of us on the academic side, we get it twisted because we think we got all this training. We about to break it down, as Love Jones says, so it can forever and consistently be broke. But the power is in that intellect that everyday Black folks have. And rather than my analytic aptitude, to put it that way, part of what we need is folks with that aptitude to be able to pull from the brilliance that we already have and put it together in something that our folk can, where they can see and recognize that beauty and that power and that possibility.
Mm. I'm wondering, you had a number of folks that watched that film with you, and you had an opportunity to discuss their observations. What were they saying that they took away from the film?
So one thing that they pointed out and really wanted to spend time on, I had teased it, but they really were ready and they really went in on this. There's a power in how Black love is presented in this movie, on a lot of different levels: communal love, individual love for self and assurance, but also romantic love between men and women, and on a couple of levels. So one, Annie's and Perline's characters and what they stood for as fully formed, confident, brilliant, bold Black women, and then their relationships with Smoke and with Preacher Boy being fully loving. They still had their stuff they had to work out. There were still challenges and problems, but having Black love presented in that way, and especially having Black women be adored, wanted, loved, cared for, held, all of that, even though love is, the ubiquitous topic in so much art, right? Rarely have you had the fullness and the texture of that kind of portrayal of love between Black folk, and especially Black women being loved in that way. So that was one key topic that they got into. Another key topic that they got into beautifully, because Cleveland, we're in a great migration city, right? Dr. Kim Phillips's book about Black Cleveland is called Alabama North because of those migration routes. But the line that Chicago ain't nothing but Mississippi with tall buildings, that resonated with people so powerfully for a couple of reasons. One, even though we were trying to escape white terror in parts of the South and coming up north, we found different versions of that terror up here. And then two, culturally, Black Cleveland, for example, or Black Chicago, having those same elements and dynamics as the communities that we have in southern towns and cities. Those ideas really captivated people and led them to want to talk about their own families' migration stories. And so that was a really important moment in the post-film convo as well.
Yes. Well, I got to tell you, Adam, I have a soft spot for romance in film. I love to see a Black love story. There was a love story in the film American Fiction, and I want to talk to you about that if you saw the film when we get on the other side of this segment. But I love a Black love story, man. You might twist my arm and force me to see Sinners at some point.
That is reason enough to see it, honestly, even with everything else that the film does. That's just one opinion, of course.
Okay. Well, I'm going to weigh that in judgment and have my consultation with the ancestors, and maybe they'll reverse their position for me. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson right here on 95.9 FM WOVU, Cleveland's urban alternative. We'll be back with Dr. Adam Banks right after this. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson and the conversation with Dr. Adam Banks, who I characterize as a supreme intellectual being. This brother has been down some interesting roads. He has some really interesting observation about one of my favorite groups, Funkadelic, George Clinton, and the whole funk movement. And we may talk a little bit about that, but I want to shift gears and talk to you about American Fiction. First, it was an extremely well-written film. I enjoyed it immensely. And as I said, I'm a sucker for a good love story. So that dynamic between him and the character that was portrayed by Erica Alexander just really, it melted me. But we got to the end of that film, and my perception is, my opinion is, he dropped the ball with that ending. There were so many different directions he could have gone with that, but I think perhaps he was trying to prove a point, and that's the way the movie ended. What are your thoughts about that film if you saw it?
So my thought is basically the same as the one that we broke on with Sinners, that your characterization of the great writing in it may be what twists my arm to go see that one finally, or pull it up on the stream.
Okay. So what did you think about the ending?
What I'm saying is I did not get to see it, and I was kind of a holdout in similar ways as you were with Sinners. And I'm saying your description of the writing may be the thing that gets me to actually see it.
Okay. So I'll let you know that this film was about a Black writer who did not want to be characterized as a Black writer.
Right. And
I don't want to ruin it for you in case you do decide to see it. But My thing is, as a writer, we have the ability to determine the outcome. We have an ability to tell the story in a way that either puts us in a good light or puts us in a bad light. You know, there's a saying, and I'm not quoting it verbatim, but basically the tale of the lion and the hunter will always favor the hunter until the lion tells the story.
Long story, right.
So this is exactly what happened with that film. And so, yeah, I hope that you will see it. You know, there aren't any vampires or anything to scare you away. But there really is an interesting dynamic between him and the character portrayed by Issa Rae. And, you know, they both wrote books of a similar nature that were just,
right.
You know, the Europeans were just gobbling them up with veracity. Like, this is just so great, but it was just so stereotypical. It was monolithic. It really didn't put us in a favorable light. And I think that was one of the reasons that those books got the amplification that they did. So hopefully watch the film and then maybe at a future point we can have another conversation.
We'll have to link back up, right?
Yes. Now there's another film that really affected me in a certain way, and that was Black Panther. And I'm sure you saw that film.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about the impact of that film on our community?
Man, this could be the subject of an entire conversation, right? Because it's so layered. So one of the things, to circle back to an earlier part of our talk today, Black Panther captures so many of the ideas of Afrofuturism and its possibility, even though this was a film created for mainstream wide world release. And so there's a care taken with elements of Afrofuturism and how to embed them in the storytelling, in the visual work of the movie that I think are profound and beautiful. Coogler's team and everybody who worked together on that, they actually consulted with Afrofuturist scholars. You could tell that they were familiar with the work of people like Walter Grayson, like Ronaldo Anderson, who's at Temple over there with Dr. Asante. So that was beautiful. The way that the movie was able to so the Marvel thing, taking Marvel comics and turning them into movies, by the point where Black Panther hit, this has been done so many times and in so many ways, right? We talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so this actually relates to Sinners in a different way. But by the time we got to Black Panther, I was a little bit of a comic book kid, but not necessarily the superhero comics in that big way. So I was like, okay, we've had enough of these. I'm ready for some new kinds of storytelling. And then Black Panther hit, and I was all in. The acting, the ways that the presentation in the movie connected elements like Black Oakland and therefore, Black cities all over the country, to the continent, to the future, to some kind of collective vision as people fight, difficult forces, evil forces. The comic book element of the hero going against evil is there, but the texture of how it was brought out in a fully Black context was done so wonderfully.
Mm. The thing that struck me about that film, aside from all that you mentioned, especially in relation to the way it connected us to Africa, because that's the whole nother subject that we could spend an entire hour on. But the issues that I had with that film, one was the end, because you have Black Panther standing there talking to the man, and the man giving his approval and endorsement and, offering a spirit of cooperation to move things forward. That was one. Number two, there was a scene in that film where you got the European person flying the aircraft out of Wakanda with the instructions that he was getting from the sister. And
Right.
that act alone was able to save Wakanda and in essence save the world. And so I took away from that whole meme of the white messiah.
Oh wow, yeah.
With all of the beauty of us connecting with our ancestry, we still needed Christ to come and save us.
That's not my read of the movie, though I do see exactly where and why that would emerge. I think broader mainstream audiences need a white savior. I don't think we need one at all, right? And so elements like that in the storytelling, and this is why I was saying I'm not the biggest Marvel fan. That's a moment where that broader white American audience and some other folks too, they needed that kind of savior figure. And I think one question to ask different artists is, what can we see in how Coogler and his team dealt with that element of Marvel movies? What else did they do to counter that? What else did they do to maybe minimize the dominance of that theme in so many action movies? Was it something that he and his team accepted uncritically? I would be really interested in the details of how they dealt with that element that is in so much American cinema.
Mm. Yeah, I can look at it through a different lens based on what you just expressed, but when I think of the film, the thing that affected me the most, to be honest with you, was a scene where he connected with his father in the ancestral realm.
Absolutely.
I mean, Adam, I had tears rolling down my cheeks.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about my own father. Mm-hmm. And, because I have a certain level of consciousness, I just understand the importance of that connection with the ancestors. So that was the thing that really fed my spirit about that film. And, the negatives that I took, again, that the one scene where he's flying the aircraft and then at the end of the film. And I don't want it to seem like, those two things just completely wiped out the significance of the film for me. But right. It was a beautiful thing. And again, perhaps, based on what you've shared, I can revisit my apprehension, because the one thing that I do know is that the Central Ignorance Agency is involved in Hollywood. And I do know that there's some subliminal, I don't want to use the term seduction going on because it's such a cliche, but I do know that there are things that are being done to manipulate us on a subconscious level when we give our brains over to folks to entertain them for a few hours. So,
right.
I think that factors in, but I think also that, with our ability to discern and our ability to exercise our intellectual capacity, perhaps, we can combat the manipulation that they're trying to do to us subconsciously. What are your thoughts?
I think your point about discernment is key. And I think that's an ability and a muscle that we have to build consciously and continually there's what happens on that side of entertainment through movies and music, right? But there's also how we're bombarded with so much in our digital lives and everyday online and social media interaction that, if we're not careful, could really deplete us too, right? Misinformation, disinformation being organized against us, and not just against us, but prominently against us. And along with that, the ways that we're all continually bombarded with images of Black death, with violence done to Black people individually, on entire local and community levels and worldwide levels. We get bombarded with that so much that it could deplete us. And so we need that discernment to not only know how to take what is useful from media that we encounter, like you were describing, and being able to kind of put that filter on for a movie like Black Panther. But in these everyday, iterative, constant interactions that we see in the different feeds that are part of our online lives. So for me, being able to hone that discernment has to happen in community. It has to happen in people figuring it out together. And that's one reason why I feel like we need so much more with the kinds of spaces that you were describing earlier, and that I've been trying to create over time.
Yes, well, I absolutely agree, and it's really heartening to walk into a room and see beautiful Black people engaged in intellectual conversations, because it's so different from a lot of the things that cross our news feeds on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and whatnot. But I will say that, social media has gone a long way to combat, even in the midst of all the misinformation and the disinformation, all the truth that's bubbling up to the surface and all the things that we're learning about history that we're not getting from the book. So yeah, there's
that's absolutely right too. Yes,
great value. We're going to talk about the book of George Clinton when we return. This is Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM, Cleveland's urban alternative. I'm speaking with the supreme intellect, Dr. Adam Banks. We'll be back. Welcome back to Open Door and this fascinating conversation about, among other things, Black intellectual capacity. And I am sitting with a scholar today who amazes me sometimes with his analysis and critical thought. In this very moment, he's maybe twisting my arm to force me to see some things that I've been reluctant to see. So I'll give him credit for that. Want to flash back to the year 2000, and we were talking about our good friend Thomas Sayers Ellis, who's written several books of poetry, photography books that I have purchased from him, by the way. But I know that he has a certain reverence for the idea of funk, and I know that you do as well. So I want to talk to you about your connection with musical genres, and specifically that phenomenon that we discuss as funk. What brought you to your connection to that, and what do you see in terms of the value to us as a people as we talk about narratives today?
I love that question. So TSE, Thomas Sayers Ellis, helped to hone my thinking about the funk for sure from our friendship. And so I want to give him credit for that from the top. But it had always been with me going back to, so I'm a child of the 70s. And so, of course, funk in so many of its forms was in the air for me as a child, and then coming into the world on my own. And one part of that, so there's the music that's playing in the neighborhood that kind of helps to set your vibration, if you will. But then my first job, I was 9 or 10 years old. I used to clean up in the Price Right record store that was in the Martin Luther King Plaza on Wade Park, because that's where I grew up. So for $2 a day, man, I would sweep and mop. I take out the garbage. I wipe down all the cases. And at 9 or 10 years old, 1980, 81, I was happy to have that $2 a day. But working in a record store and kind of seeing people's joy around music and how everybody would find their own stuff, that was one piece of it. And then, of course, with the radio, I'm old enough to have had a little bit of WJMO, We Jam More Often, in my bloodstream, as well as when stations like WZAK came onto the scene. And so even though my own personal lane in the music is the slow jam, we were talking about Black Love earlier, funk is right there. And the funk and slow jam, so much so my tagline, or part of my bio, is I call myself a slow jam in the hip hop world. So even as hip hop was coming to dominate, it was funk music, and it was R&B and soul, and especially in the slow jam that really appealed to me. The other part of your question was, what do we get out of the funk, right? So a couple of things right quick for me. So when we talk about, you can't talk about funk without talking about the one, right? Like that one principle that organizes all of it. That on that downbeat, on that one, the one is heavily emphasized. And look, big bands like P Funk, especially as they took James Brown's concept and made it metaphysical, pretty much, made it a whole theory. You got 40, 50 people on stage. And the idea that those 40, 50 people could do whatever on earth they wanted to do for the rest of the measure, playing with the harmonies, against the harmonies, with the beat, against the beat, dancing on speakers, playing bass in a diaper, whatever, as long as you come back on the one. It's a beautiful idea or even philosophy for me about how we can have unity and still have the range in all of who we are as a people, right? There's room for all of the wildness, all the irreverence, all of the individuality, and still community.
I'm thinking about the film They Cloned Tyrone. Did you see that one?
I did, and then I need to go back to it. I'm going to admit that.
Okay. Well, there was just that whole idea of the impact that music had on the people, and they were using the music to control us, like they were using, whatever drugs they were putting in the fried chicken and everything else. But when you talked about that 40 or 50 people on stage, and what happens between those four beats, I just kind of started thinking about how it kind of brings us together like it did that day in Montgomery when everybody woke up for a few moments and took on the oppressor without even having to have a conversation about what needed to happen. They just did it. I think that's kind of what the funk does for us. So there's a certain synchronicity that happens when we lock into that rhythm. And it helps us discover who we are and what we're supposed to be doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, your point that there's power in funk that can bring us together, I think, is really key. And then I'll add maybe one or two more layers to what you're describing. So one, funk gives us space to be our wildest, freest, most unassimilated selves. The irreverence of it, the play with taboos, the play with societal norms, to say we're going to overturn all of that in this space of the music, that's one place where there's liberatory possibility, right? But it doesn't stop there. It's a way of understanding both participation and resistance, which carries us back to your civil rights movement example. So, funk bands, funk artists, funk musicians, funk visual artists like Pedro Bell, folks on the contemporary scene like Michel and Ndegeocello, profoundly proficient and participate in all of these systems, even though they also carve out, just like Outkast does, space for us to be our fullest selves, both within and outside it, right? And so being able to give people ideas that help them be their fullest selves, that's where art can power liberation.
Mm-hmm. And you know what else? I think it does what we talked about in the first segment, and that is marrying the sacred with the secular.
That's right.
Just the whole idea of dance is something that connects us with things that perhaps have been demonized because we see things through the lens of European religion. But, when folks start dancing, they connecting with something on the other side of things, some unseen forces in the situation,
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Something else I'm thinking about when you mentioned slow jams, back in the day, we used to have basement parties.
Absolutely.
And
we even got Roberta Flack's album Blue Lights
in the basement. I was just thinking about that, And I came up in the '70s, so I was privileged to go to those things. And what would happen is that the best time of the evening is when the slow jam came on.
Absolutely.
And then you got to be intimate with someone, and in a very nice way, I guess, depending on your relationship with that person. But these days we don't have the same dynamic. I can remember going to nightclubs in New York and they were playing, disco music and whatnot. But for some reason, the DJ might take a break and play 3 slow jams in a row. Mm-hmm. And it was something that you really needed because you wanted to get close to someone. But now everybody's line dancing. And we're separate from each other, and we're not coupling up the way we used to. What's happened, man? We've gone from analog to digital, and digital has really kept us away from each other.
It's so one. I agree that when line dancing emerged, especially in Cleveland, right? We got the line dance king in Cleveland, Robert Johnson. We got Bud McFarlane before that. And DJs who really made it a signature in Cleveland. But so a couple of things, right? One, I missed slow dancing and I missed the slow jam being a part of going to hang out in a night spot. I missed those profoundly. But let me add a couple of things to what you said, right? So line dancing is still communal, though. Mm-hmm. We did the Trans-Europe Express in the monorail. There's a joy that when everybody starts shouting, repeat that mother, right? Because you're going to bring back that particular step. And so in this resurgence of line dancing now, even where them fans at with boots on the ground, there's a collective joy that's a part of the experience. And so we haven't gotten entirely individualistic with that. But the space for the slow dance and the slow jam itself, I think it's connected to a lot of other changes in society, right? So those changes make it harder for individual people to connect with each other on the level of the tenderness and the closeness that the slow dance brings. Sidebar, the book in my head that I need to work on, I just need to make space for this, is about the slow jam through different eras. And so in this moment, in the digital, because you mentioned digital and analog, for these young folks in their 20s and 30s, maybe even some teens, one way that the spirit of the slow dance is still alive is in how people make and curate playlists for each other. We might say it goes down to the DMs now, right? Where a private message is where a lot of flirting and courtship happen. And there's an intimacy to how people share music with each other as a part of that space. Even though they're coming together through the digital, they're not necessarily meeting each other, outside, as we would say. A lot of the elements of the culture still hold, but they shift. And I'll just end this part by saying, even though I understand the shifts, I absolutely still miss being able to go to a particular spot on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, dance to the reggae or whatever other genres, and have that hope that, throughout the night I will have met somebody that I want that slow dance with.
Yes. Well, that's quite a vision. I'm thinking of the Quarter Century Club, Vale's Party Center. It used to be on, I think it was East 105th Street. Not there anymore.
Yeah, the original, yeah.
Yeah, but
before they went up the hill, on Fair Hill.
We had some moments there. We have just a few moments left. I want you to re-announce the program that will start on July 26th.
Yeah, so starting on July 26th and going for 4 consecutive Saturdays from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock at UnBar Cafe, we are doing a reading group for Winston Willis, a memoir written heavily by his sister, who's still alive now, and Mr. Willis is still alive, as many people know, Aundra Willis Carrasco. We're providing the books. We're providing refreshments. The whole point is to build community together and space for us. And one of the elements of that community building will be our using our time together with Willis's story to get into our own oral histories with neighborhoods, with parts of Cleveland that we love and connect to. And I just got to say this, since I'm here with you, and generally, thank you, brother, for being willing to screen your own film, looking at Mr. Willis and looking at that experience as part of the kickoff to the group effort, starting in about a month.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for your ideas about the collective. It clearly resonates with me. And I said before, and I'll say it again, it's just heartwarming to see our folks intellectually engaged. So thank you for the work that you are doing. And we'll look forward to being there on the 26th of July. You've been listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson right here on 95.9 FM. My guest has been Dr. Adam Banks. Thanks for joining me today, Brother Adam.
Thank you, brother. I really appreciate the time.
All right. And thank you for listening. As always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, and make today your absolute best day. Peace.